Now, there are several commands that you can use. You can use an insert, you can do an update, you can do an upsert, you can do a delete, undelete, merge. Actually, a few more DML commands that you can use.
That makes sense.
And we're going to cover here 5 of these 6. And your task is to mentally answer the following questions. Let's suppose we have one scenario that says, retrieve into memory a contact whose lead source is trade show, modify the lead source to other, and persist this modification on your org. Which DML command are you going to be using? And if you're thinking of an update, you are absolutely correct. Scenario number 2, create a new instance of a contact in memory and then persist this new instance to your Salesforce org. And if you're thinking insert, you are absolutely correct. Users were incorrectly entered as contacts through the UI. You want to retrieve those contacts into memory and use their IDs values to remove them from the org. And if you're thinking of a delete, you are absolutely correct. Create new contacts in memory. Also modify existing contacts that were called into memory using so-called. So now you have a list with both new and old contacts, and you want with a single command persist the new and the modified contacts to the org. And if you're thinking of an upsert, you are absolutely correct. Last but not least, actually the contacts removed in scenario 3 were created correctly. We changed our mind. So use so-called to retrieve those contacts from the recycle bin into memory. Then restore those contact records. That is an undelete. All right, good job. Now I'm going to deviate a little bit from these slides, and I'm gonna go to this awesome website. I'm gonna look for DML commands. Oh, DML standalone. All right. And I'm going to copy this to here. I'm gonna go to the collaboration. I'm gonna paste this thing here.
What's that, babe?
Gonna get the link, and then I'm gonna mention my friend El Toro.
Oh, I didn't hear. We didn't. Simba and I didn't hear it.
All right.
So.
Anytime I post anything on the community, I always post it here. So make sure you also follow that group there. El Toro Friends. That's my nickname. All right. Cool. So what I want to show you is this little table here that I created many years ago. Not very pretty. I'm not an artist.
Oh, well, that's
conceptually is very good. So let me make a little bit bigger, just so that you guys can see it better. I think that should be good. I have a list of accounts in a variable named ACS. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 records in that list. 2 of those records will fail because either they don't have a required field, there is an invalidation rule that I fired when I save this and it doesn't do that. There is a trigger in Apex that is checking for the proper values or whatever and making like an invalidation rule in Apex and it fails that, or any other reason. 2 records are bad. In order to insert these records into a database, I have 4 different possible options. I've got insert ACS, which is the list of accounts. I have database that insert accounts, have database that insert accounts true, and I have database insert accounts false. Notice that regardless of which of these three I use, they work in exactly the same way. And the way that it is happening is that if there is a bad record, none of the records will go into a database.
I try to assume the best.
And it will throw me a DML exception, which I can put inside a try catch block.
Yeah.
That DML exception will have information about the two records that failed. Had I done database that insert account false, three of those records would have been inserted into the database. Two of those records would have been rejected from the database.
Mm-hmm.
How many records were successfully processed? And what I mean successfully processed is if the record was good, insert it. If the record was bad, detect and report the error. That's a successful processing of that record. So how many records were not successfully processed? Sorry. How many records were actually processed is what I meant. And the fact that this was processed and rejected, it was actually processed. And it was properly processed. All right, so which of those, how many records were properly handled? 5 records were properly handled. So you're gonna get a response with a list of saved results in the same order as these guys to handle those 5 different records. You get a list of saved results with exactly the same number of records as the number of saved results that you have, and they are exactly in the same order. So in this blog that I wrote, and you will be look at it later, if I do any of the first 3, I'm going to catch a DML exception. Had I done a database insert false, I need to retrieve the results and then process them. And there will be as many saved results as there were accounts. And one of the things that I have to check is to see if the record itself was actually successful. Was it inserted into the database? Because if it is not, then I need to report the error. Okay, you're gonna go through this document afterwards. And I believe I did put in here the document. All right, cool. So going back to the slides, this was the slide that I skipped. There is a few ways of doing that. We can do data insert, we can do database insert. It will work exactly the same way. There's actually 3 flavors. You can do insert contacts, database insert, and database true. That will behave the same way. One bad record, none of the records will be saved. The only difference here is when you do database insert with a false. Now that parameter is called all or none. All or none false means, all or none true means you either insert all the records or none of the records. When you do all or none false, that basically means some. Don't do all or don't do none. Do as many as you can. Okay, good. All right, so let's talk about exceptions and governor limits. A little demo again. We're going to go back to, actually, hold on. No, go back to the demo. Go back to Chrome, go back to the developer console. Get rid of this. Copy the code. Okay. And copy the code. Bring up back Chrome. All right, paste this and maximize. All right, so kind of related to a similar example that we had before, we have a list called 3 numbers. We're gonna go through 3 numbers here, but I'm gonna get the size, which is gonna be 3. 3 plus 1, 4. And from this list where I can only do brackets 0, brackets 1, brackets 2, I'm actually going to do brackets 4, and hopefully that is an exception. So we're going to catch it, and we're going to display that we did have an exception. And finally, once we have passed through this code here, we're going to display this message. And let's run that. So exception caught, this block executes regardless of exceptions. What that last statement means is if I do a bracket 1, which is valid, and I click on execute, and I search for debug only statements, notice that before, when we had the exception, 2 lines were being executed, including the block executes regardless of exception, because it does. There was no exception here, but the blocking finally was actually executed. Finally will be executed after it's done. It will do this, or after it's done with the exceptions, it will do this. Governor limits. What are Apex governor limits? Well, good question. I'm glad you asked. Apex governor limits, or as I had recently heard somebody calling them, the efficiency constraints, are limits imposed by Salesforce to make sure that your code works efficiently, and also that anybody else's code will not break the efficiency of your code. Because regardless of how much a bad programmer writes, how bad a bad programmer writes their code, they will not be affecting the performance of the Salesforce servers. Now, if you are that bad programmer, your code will stop executing with an unhandled exception called the governor limit, or the performance exception. Exception which you cannot put in a try-catch block. If you hit one of these, it's game over. The transaction terminates. Now, all the governor limits are bound to what is called an Apex transaction. An Apex transaction is basically the unit of work that is executed as a single unit when the user hits the server. So if you are creating a record and you click on the save button, that information goes to Salesforce, your transaction starts right there. It does all you have to do. At the end of it, it will commit the data and it will return back saying record has been created or something. Okay, that's what an Apex transaction is. And the governor limits are bound to those transactions. All right, cool. Now, there is a limits class that has 2 different methods. One is called get limit something, and limits get something. Get limit queries, get limit get queries. Get limit queries, get limit rows, get limit DML, get blah, 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 a whole bunch of get limits or gets methods. Now, the get limit tells you how many, actually, let's do this demo. So let me go back to here, clear the code here. We're gonna go to grab the code from the slide, paste it in here. So get limit will tell you what is the maximum number of queries So this kind of works like this: get limit and get. So what is the maximum number of whatever goes here that I have in my transaction? And then get how many of those have I used. So if I go back to this, how many queries can I perform in my transaction and how many I have performed? And then I could also do a plus, and I'll do remaining, and I'm going to have to put a plus in here and continue to the next line. And I'm going to do limits, get query limits, minus how many I have used. And if I execute this, oh, hold on. Oh, yeah, because I need the parentheses. So it is doing, it was, without the parentheses, it was getting a string, plus a string, that's concatenation, plus a string, or plus a value here, that's concatenation, plus a string, without the parentheses, plus this, minus this. Well, of course, that's kind of confusing. So this goes here, and we need an extra parenthesis right here to match that one. And we click execute. You cannot do A plus B plus C minus D. It's not string concatenation. All right, if I click on the debug, you will see I have a total 100. I've done 1, 99 remaining, 2, 98, 3, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes down, 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 until I get to the bottom where it says I have each 100 remaining. All right, had I done a, it's equals to, I save that. Actually, I don't save that, sorry. I execute that. Then it gives me a limit exception, too many SOCO queries. It is a limit exception, all right, so let's catch that. So I'm going to put all that stuff in a try catch. I was going to do console.log, too much JavaScript lately. System.debug of exception. Right. And I click execute. So I'm going to capture that. So I'm going to stop me. I'm just going to be able to look at the exception, right? Wrong. You cannot capture that. Once it happens, it's too late. The only thing that I can do is make sure that I don't have queries inside my loops. Because if I do, then I'm going to, and I have too many of those, then I'm going to, but you don't, if it is data driven, you don't know how many you're going to have. So make sure you never put queries inside your loops, because you are going to have governor limits and you cannot do anything to prevent those from happening. All right, back to the slides. Now, be careful when working with DMLs and doing the limits with the DMLs. As I mentioned before in the previous slide or demo, never put a SOCL inside a for loop. That same applies to DML operations. So don't put updates or inserts or any other DML operation inside a loop. Why? Let's suppose that we build this code in our sandbox. And in sandbox, we have 25 different contacts. We run this, we retrieve 25, we update that, we retrieve the 25, one contact at a time. We modify that contact, we add whatever forms or whatever is required there, and then we update that. Then we go for the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. We do 25. And then we're good, we're done, woo! We deploy to production. But what do we have to do? We have to test it. and you don't do good testing. Well, I'm going to talk about later what's good testing. Basically, you only test for a handful of records. You don't test for 200 records. Had you test for 200 records, this is gonna blow in Sandbox before you actually deploy, and you will be preventing a disaster from happening on your production environment. You don't want those things to happen on production. But you only tested for 25 records, and that's good. They are good. All right, you deploy that. In this production environment, you have 3,000 contacts, or probably even more than that. And then you bring all of them. You're gonna try to loop here more than 150 times, which, by the way, 150 is the number of DMLs you can execute in a transaction. Yeah, after the 151st, this blows up, and then you start getting calls from your users, and then your users calls your manager, and you start getting calls from your manager, and your manager calls your manager, and then you're in big trouble. So you don't want to have that done, because you're doing a DML inside of a loop. So never, ever, ever put a DML operation inside a loop. So what do? Oh, being smart, we know that we can rewrite the same code like this. List of contacts, it's a new list. Then you're gonna create a for loop. You're gonna loop through them, and you're gonna look for IDs from contacts, and you're gonna bring that 3,000 contacts one at a time. You modify, you add that contact here. You modify, you add that contact. You modify, you add that contact. You modify, you add the contact. So these contacts now have 3,000 different contacts, and you perform one DML operation, and you are good. So you've only done one DML, and that's good. But you were building a list of 3,000 contacts. There is another governor limit, which is how many records you can perform in DML operations. So you can perform 150. Don't worry about the numbers. This is just for explanation of the math of how things work around here. Don't worry about the numbers. You will end up memorizing them from seeing them so many times, or that you, at the end of the day, you're gonna memorize them. But you're not gonna be asked about those numbers in the exam. You're just gonna ask about the concepts in the exam. All right, good. So we have 3,000 contacts. That's fine. We can DML up to 10,000 records. So let's suppose that we're gonna fetch only 10,000 contacts. You're gonna end up with the end of this loop. At the end of this loop, you're gonna end up with a list of up to 10,000 records. But there is yet another governor limit that you need to consider. That is the heap size, how much memory you are consuming. And you can only consume up to 6 megabytes. Now, if we think about this, we have 6 megabytes, and we have 10,000 records. Actually, on Monday, well, no. So on Monday, no. We'll talk about that later. There is, let me get my calculator here. 6 million divided 10,000, that gives me 600 characters per record. And let's suppose that we are bringing not only the ID and the contact for the contact, by the name and the address and the description and another big paragraph of text and another big paragraph. 600 characters is not that much anymore. So putting the DML outside the loop could, depending on how much data you're working with, but some of these issues are data oriented, and you don't know how much data you're going to have until you actually run it in production, and maybe 3 years from now it's going to be a different number from what you have right now. So you may have a different type of error and different type of governor limit. So rewind. Never put your DML operation inside the loop. Never put the DML operation outside the loop. Wait, hold on. What? Never inside? Never outside? So what? Am I not supposed to put any DMLs? No. You're going to put them on the middle of the loop. Now, these 4 statements that you have here, if there are 3 characteristics on a for loop, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, I'm going to list them in a minute. If you have 3 characteristics, then you're going to work with pieces of your data, pieces that are going to be 200 records. There's a magical number in Salesforce. You will see the number 200 multiple times in different places. The number is a 200. There applies to many different things that we're not going to talk about them right now. But one of them is this particular thing. As long as you have 3 things on your for loop, which are, first, the word for. Second, you're going to iterate through a list of records. Third, a query with a square bracket or with database.query. 1, 2, 3, 4 list query. Then the records are going to be brought back to you in pieces of 200 records each piece. 200 is a magical number. Eric, are you online?
I am indeed.
You want to explain the laundry service?
The way I usually explain this is, back when I was in college, I wasn't the cleanest guy in the world. I used to take my dirty clothes and just throw them on the floor, and they would all coagulate in one big pile. And I just decided to call that, there's just a heap of clothes there. One day my mom came over to visit, and she noticed this heap of clothes in the middle. Says, well, how long has it been since you've done laundry? A week, maybe 2. And she says, I'll do your laundry for you. So she cleaned off my heap of clothes, got me a real bona fide laundry basket, and put the clothes in the basket, went and did my laundry for me down at the apartment laundromat, and brought them back and put them away for me, like the sweet mom that she was. And she got to the point where she made a habit of it, and I thought, wow, I've got a real laundry service here that I probably shouldn't be using, because I probably should take responsibility for doing my own clothes. Of course, being an irresponsible 18-year-old freshman in college, that was a problem for me back then. So I like to liken this loop very similar to that. This is the SOQL for loop, and what it will do is it will take all of the laundry, i.e. all of the objects that you've thrown onto your heap, and for every 200 iterations of your outer for loop, here what you've got, your select list of contacts in select ID from contact. That's your outer for loop. Because notice you've got concentric loops here. You got 2 for loops. You got one outside loop and an inner loop. So they're concentric loops. The outer loop will run once for every 200 iterations of contacts that you've got in your contact table. And during the inner for loop, you are throwing clothes onto that heap. Well, no problem. Go ahead and throw clothes on your heap. You're going to get your clothes dirty anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Just put them in the right laundry basket, i.e. this is your collection, okay? And at the end of those records that's in your 200 iterations, your database.update service, now you have just done your laundry. Think of that as your mom doing your laundry for you. And then once she's done that, she gives you back a fresh laundry basket, i.e. your heap. and then goes and executes the next 200, and you fill that up with clothes, and then she'll come over and do your laundry again. The benefit to these concentric loops is you avoid having any of your laundry fall out onto the floor. As bad as it smells, I'm sure, mine certainly did. You avoid having any of it fall onto the floor and making a mess. And if it does that, then you've tripped the heap size limit, and you don't want to do that. And this coding construct will help you avoid all of that. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. Love that story. That's why you tell it much better than I do. So that's why.
It's because I was such a bad college freshman. That's why.
Well, that was a very neat. Not really. Very neat. No, not really. All right, cool. Thank you, sir. All right. So hopefully that helps you remember that story. Think about that story when you're writing your loops, the laundry service. And you're going to be putting your DMLs then not inside, not outside, but in the middle of that concentric loops that Eric was talking about. With this, you will be able to get collection of 200 records. And if you have like 1,000 records and you got collections of 200, you're gonna iterate over this big loop 5 times. This will be done for each of your records of 200 and then 200 and then 200 and then 200. But once you process the 200, then you're gonna do one single DML. So with these concentric loops, with this laundry service, you are basically getting for 1,000 contacts, you are controlling both the heap size, the amount of laundry, dirty laundry that you have on the floor, and also collecting that your mom does not come and pick and washes every single little shirt that you use, or every single little pair of socks that you use or whatnot. So get a basket, get it full of 200 contacts, get that cleaned, and then the next basket, and then the next basket. So you're minimizing the amount of washing that you do, and you're minimizing that it's not an infinite or a huge pile that you cannot even walk in your dorm, apartment, or bedroom, or whatever that may be. All right, cool. There's a couple trails for this. That includes the formulas and validations, Apex basics and database. And also there is a little bit of good knowledge on the database and .NET basics. Even if you're not a .NET, it doesn't really go too much into the .NET, but start comparing some of the Apex concepts with things that you would do on .NET, or for that matter, on any other object-oriented programming. So with that, we're gonna jump into part 2 of the logic and process automation, where the objectives that are being covered on this particular section include the patterns used on triggers and classes to process data efficiently, describing when to use and how to write your triggers, describe the implications of governor limits on Apex transactions, describe the relationship between Apex transactions, safe execution order, and potentially for recursion and cascading effects. So let's start talking with working with classes. So in Salesforce, there's several reasons why you would want to have classes built. As we are going to mention later, when we talk about the triggers, one of the rules that you should always try to follow is that you don't want to have your business logic included inside your trigger. Your trigger should be very small and should only be invoking methods in classes. So we need to talk about classes then. And that is actually one of the use cases. It is the trigger handler. There is another use case, which is for testing. As we're going to learn later in the testing, before you can deploy code to production, you have to write test code. And you're going to write those on a private testing. You could, and it would make sense sometimes, and we'll talk about that in this testing section, to make some of your methods reusable within different test classes. For that, you're going to create a test class which is marked as public. We talk about model view controller. If you're building Visualforce and you want to write your own controllers, you're going to write Visualforce pages. Or you can have classes to basically model any type of data and behavior, just like a regular class in any other object-oriented programming, by creating your own general classes. But it's not only classes that you can create, you can also create interfaces and implement them. Or talking about inheritance, you can create virtual and or abstract classes and extend them. Now, what's inside a class? In a class, you're going to have a public with sharing. Here's a missing word. Should I fix the slides? Public with sharing class, my class. And then you're going to have member variables like basically variables like integers and strings and booleans, or maybe a contact or an account, or maybe a custom underscore C object or whatnot. Then you can also have properties which are basically a really cool construct that I highly use whenever I write my Apex code, because it gives me one more level of encapsulation. And this is basically one single element containing not only the value for the property, but also containing inside of that thing a getter and a setter. And if I want to get a value, or if I want to set a value on that property, I have to go through my getter and my setter. So I could do some type of checking validations or whatnot. I use those guys very, very much. Then the third thing you have are constructors. How do you know this is a constructor? Remember that if the name of the method and the name of the class match, and it has no return type, it is a constructor. Some of my students sometimes forget that last part. If this was public void my class, that was not a constructor. You probably get an error because you should not be having a return type. So you have variables, properties, constructors, or any other type of methods that you want. As you see, all of these guys are public, but you could have also things that are global. Sometimes, depending on what you're building, if you're building a batch Apex, if you're building a schedule Apex, if you're building a Apex web service, if you're building a couple more things like that, you have to use global. And it will be very easy to know because it won't compile. So you're trying to do this, it has to be global. So you just go ahead and change the value of that. Global is also used for partners on the App Exchange to make public, or no, sorry, not make public, make available some of the methods in their package so that you can use them, just like if you were doing a calls to that package API. Basically, that's what it is. You also have public, protected, and private. They work very, very much the same way as they do work in any other programming language, with the big exception that, although this screen talks about namespaces, you will not be able to create a namespace. The only namespaces that are created are by special, not a special, but any package that is published on the App Exchange as a managed package will have their own namespace. And that's it. You cannot create your own namespaces. So then, basically, public, protected, and private comes in like from any other any other object-oriented programming language. So public across your namespace, protected and protected for you and your children, and private only for you. There is one thing that we kind of didn't really talk about much, and that was the with sharing annotation. Well, not annotation, keywords, I guess. So public with sharing class, respect sharing, or without sharing, or inherited sharing. Apex, by default, will run and will in what is called system mode, which means it will ignore any restrictions on the object axis. It will ignore any restrictions on the field level axis. And you control if you want to ignore or respect the sharing axis. With sharing, and the way I like to think about this, I always have some phrases or stuff that helps me remember things in Salesforce, because sometimes the words are not the most easy to understand. So with sharing means with sharing rules enabled, which means if there are 1,000 contacts, but you can only see 50 of them, with sharing, a SOCO query that you execute in a class annotated with sharing will only retrieve the records that you are able to see, because you are having this code with the sharing rules enabled. And sharing rules says you don't have access to any records except these 50 records. Without sharing, it gives you full access to every record, even if you do not have access to those records. So when you use a SOCO query in a without sharing class, you will be returning all 1,000 contacts, even if you're only able to see 50 of them. It can be possible, and we'll describe this on the next slide, to have a class that reads public class X, not with sharing, not without sharing, and they kind of work in a kind of weird fashion. And sometimes when you are going through that code, it's not very clear if the programmer that wrote it like that with class X, because he didn't know about with or without sharing, or he knew and he purposely wanted to not use any of those with or without sharing. So in order for you to be a good citizen, a good developer, you are going to have another keyword, which is called inherit sharing. If you do know about with or without sharing, you understand what they actually do mean. But in this particular class, you are not sure if you want to do with or without, because it really depends. You're going to use something that is called inherit sharing, which means I know, don't tell me I know with or without sharing. I know that. Don't tell me, I know it. But in this particular case, I wasn't sure if I wanted to use it or not, because if I come from this side, I do. If I come from this side, I don't. So then I'm gonna do what is called inherit share, which is none of your classes should be without any of these words. So what is what will happen if you have a class, public class, no keyword phrase class? So we didn't use with, without, or inherit. What will happen? How is this class gonna work? It really depends on how the class is being invoked from. If it is invoked from the anonymous block, remember when we went to a developer console, we opened the developer developer console, and we start typing some things on the execute anonymous block. This is running on full user mode. It's the only time where Apex runs as the user. So basically, we know who is running the code in an anonymous block. So it's basically not anonymous because we know who the user is. Any other time, we're basically going to ignore CRUD and field level security. But record access, as we have been talking about in the last couple of slides, is controlled by you, by the developer. If it is called, if this class, which does not have any keyword, is being called from a trigger, it will be ignored the sharing model. So it will run without considering the sharing model. So it will be without sharing. If this called class is called from any other class, it depends on what that other class had. So it is like the inherit sharing we saw at the bottom of the previous slide, except that it doesn't explicitly say that you know that it's gonna run like that and that you need to be careful with that. Okay, good. So let's talk about triggers. A trigger is also a piece of Apex code that runs automatically whenever you modify records in the database. Either because you create new records, you update those records, you delete those records, or you undelete those records. It is code that is going to be executed by Salesforce when the operation of saving the record is going on. All right, so there's two bubbles here. Because the triggers run at least 2 times. And then there is something called a before and an after trigger. But please, I know this next thing that I'm gonna ask you is really hard to do, but please, when you hear the words before and after, do not think about when they run. It's a really bad naming. In English, you can say, I attended this fantastic webinar by El Toro and Eric before I took the exam. Or you can say, I posted on the Trailblazer community after I passed the exam. So the words before and after kind of have some chronological meaning whenever you are speaking in English. When you are speaking on Apex, which is another language, programming language, but it's a language. So whenever you are speaking on Apex, do not get those words confuse you. It does not mean when they run. It means why you are creating those triggers, or why they are running, or what you can do when they are running. Not when, but what. So what can they be used for? Either one of them can be used to validate the data. Sometimes it makes sense to validate it in before, sometimes it makes sense to do it in the after. We'll talk about that later on the next module. But in a before trigger, is the only place where you are allowed to make changes to the records that you are saving to a database. The after will give you some additional information that is not available on the before triggers, including the ID of the record that is being inserted. So if you need to build a use case that says, I need you to save this record, and when you create an account, I need you to create a contact record, you're going to do that on a before trigger. What am I talking about? Hold on, 1 second. I got confused. I got distracted. Wait a minute. Let me do it again. If you need to create an account, and when you create an account, you create a contact. Automatically, you create a contact. You're going to do that on an after trigger. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So you're gonna create a after trigger because you need the ID of the account in order to be able to say that this contact belongs to that particular account. If you need to make a change, then you're going to do that on a before trigger. Now, I'm going to, once again, I'm going to take a little detour. I'm gonna do a little demo of what I'm talking about. Let's close all these windows. I'm going to create a new trigger, Apex trigger, which is going to be called trigger account. And it's going to ask me on which object you want to attach this trigger to. And you click submit, and you get the trigger, the name of the trigger, and the account, and then the events that you're interested, like for example, before insert and after insert. You can change anything in this trigger except this word. You cannot say, oh, I want this in contact. No, it has been an account. You cannot change it anymore. That's why when you created it, it asks you which account, which object you want it to, and you assign it to an account. This trigger has permanently been linked with the account object. Have you, if you desire to change it, then you need to actually delete it and create another trigger. And I am going to then do this. System debug. We're going to see later on the slides. There are several variables like trigger.new, which it is going to be a list of records that you can perform or you are inserting. And so you can do trigger.new, you can do size records inserted. All right, and let's leave it like that for now. Although we haven't really talked about testing yet, but kind of briefly mention it some places here and there, I am going to actually create a new class, which is going to be account trigger. Oh, what am I? No, wait, hold on. Which is trigger account test. And this is going to be a test class. And it has a test method. Tests return nothing and receive nothing, and they have to be static. One reason I'm doing it for this particular demo, one reason I'm doing a test is I'm taking advantage of something that happens is that when you perform a DML operation testing, your data will not be committed to a database. So I'm actually going to pretend that I am inserting records, but they will not be permanently saved to a database. All right, so list accounts equals to new list of account. Oh, missed one character here. For integer, I equals to 0, I less than 50, I plus plus for integer. Then ACS that add new account for the name of the account is going to be Acme plus I. Then I'm going to do an insert. I. Oh, ACS. So let me see. I have a test is the name of the test, the name of the class I'm testing plus underscore test. Test one. I got a list of things here. I'm going to create a loop 50 times. Each of them is going to add. That taking so long to say. It's going to add a new account with the name Acme. I'm gonna insert that after the loop. Okay, that should be right. Something's happening here. All right, now it's saved. Good. So I'm now going to click over here on this button to run the test, that opens a log, so that creates a log. And if I open the log that was created and hit on the debug only, I see that the trigger ran twice, both times 50 records. Why is it twice? Well, it's because one is running for before insert and the other one is running for the after insert. So the triggers will always work with a collection of records. The trigger did not get fired 50 times. It only got fired once on the before insert and on an after insert. But then what I want to do is if trigger is before, then I'm gonna do account dot name account dot billing country equals to Canada. I am changing the value of a field to that, and that's basically all I need to do. I think so. Oh, billing, yes, billing country. Wow, it's taking a long time to say. Again, it comes along these deployments. Sometimes with this tool it does happen. Oh, I still have an error. But it cannot be billing country of that. Huh? Billing city. Number of employees. Oh wait, I don't have an account. I need to, because it's a trigger, I need to do a for count a in trigger dot new, and then I'm gonna get this out of here, put it here, and then I do a ct, do a ct, and I think the problem was something else. Billing country, billing country. All right, let's save that. Oh, seriously? Stuck again? All right, good. So let me refresh because I think this is losing synchronization right now. So I'm gonna refresh. All right, so I'm going to change the value, and then in my test, if the trigger worked successfully, I'm going to list of account ACTS, it's equals to select ID name from, billing country. From account. I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do the loop data I told you to do. So for list of accounts, colon, and then for account ACT in ACTS. And I'm just going to system.debug ACT dot country. And actually, let's reduce the number here because my example is otherwise not going to be very clear. Before this, oh no, I cannot do that. I cannot check that before. Well, you know that I'm not adding the billing country here on this new, or because I'm not in this new account because I'm not doing it here. I mean, that's readable there. And then I inserted the trigger should pick it up and modify that. And then what I'm going to do after that is I'm going to do the concentric for loops where the first outer loop is going to be on a list of a query, and then it's going to print the 5 accounts that I just did, and I'm going to show that the billing country for all those 5 accounts is actually Canada, as we just noted. So if we run this test, and we go to logs, and we go to this one here, and we click on this checkbox, you will see that the trigger runs twice. One is before, one's the after. And then all different countries, all the billing countries were set to appeal in Canada. So that can only be done on a is before, because if I try to do this on the after, hopefully I don't have to reset this thing again. I don't know, it's acting funny today. I think it's because I'm in a class, on a demo with 500 of you guys. All right, so if I try to run this test again, first exception on row something, look for the word exception. Record is read only, 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 and not in state, the app settings are failed. So that changing can only happen on a is before. But if I wanted to have access to, let's put in here, I'm not gonna do that because it's taking too much time. I'm not gonna do that. So that's the difference between is before and is after. The other thing I wanted to show you is that we're only able to get some of the fields like the ID when we are running on the after triggers.
Question, Andres?
Yes.
Yes. Students would like to know when we will be taking a break.
What time is it? Oh my God, I'm having so much fun here. Let's do that right now. Let's break right now for lunch, and we'll come back in half an hour. So right now it's 12:15, and we'll be back at 12:45 for after lunch. Thanks, Eric. I'm glad you're on the phone. Otherwise, I will keep speaking for all day, and these guys will go painting. All right, so half an hour. Yep. Deal?
Deal.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hey, Angie, it's Will.
Hey, Will.
Thanks for taking a little bit of time on your lunch break. I know you're very busy with stuff today, so um, that's why I tried to kind of build out a couple of things or write down some notes and stuff to send to you to kind of expedite it. But
Yep.
I don't know if you've had a chance to look at any of it, but like in my last email, I kind of, not really a mental map, but I just kind of blocked out, hey, if we do an approach like this, this is potentially how we could layer epics out, but what data do we need to do that? What items do we need, et cetera. But I don't know if you've had a chance to look at any of it, and does any of what I'm saying make sense? Basically.
No, it makes sense. I just started answering your email about the
Yeah.
phase items.
Yeah.
So I'll go through this. So the only thing I won't be able to answer today is the estimate on the days and how many, because based
Yeah.
on that big estimate we did,
Mhm.
I use math, right? For every report that
Yeah.
needs to be touched, estimate 15 to 30 minutes of time, depending on the change needed, right?
Right.
So I need to do all that remath again to give you a true
Yeah.
estimate on timing, to be honest. And then we
Right.
can break it out by like you have the ethics of use case one versus use case two versus use case three, four, five, whatever.
Sure.
The I was just thinking through this, was looking through your questions, and I was thinking, you know what? Um, there really are. Uh, so use case two and three,
Yeah.
we say like there's no change,
Mhm.
but I think but there is.
Mhm.
I was just kind of thinking through that. I'm like, how do I define at the nitty gritty level, like because that's going to impact the
Mhm.
timing that you need, right? Um,
Right.
from a Neville perspective, it's the same for him, but for our working perspective, there's still a little more effort involved. So
Yeah.
I have to go through that for timing as well. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
so,
because my thought was kind of like we laid out in the slide deck. If there's a place to start, for example, we
hmm
could start with the things that um, they're consisting of items that don't require corporate metrics. So we, I assume, by everything we've talked about, we wouldn't need to necessarily pull any data from anybody, whether it be corporate data mart or RAW. So therefore, we can just kind of do the work ourselves. Is that correct?
yep. So yep, that
Okay.
holds true. We can get basically
Mhm.
our environment we have basically set up already. Now we have to start
Yeah.
building out and adding the additional fields to the database in Salesforce. We can
Mhm.
do that, but the caveat is if the data warehouse team doesn't tell us or confirm that what our assumptions are, that whole mapping exercise,
Mhm.
we could be wrong. We could be adding more than we need. We could be missing things that we need. So there's still going to need to be, there's possibly rework or additional work once that, um, what do you call it, the export project starts.
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
we can take our best guess at it. I mean, that obviously we have to do something, right? So we can get close to what
Yeah.
we think. Um,
Yeah.
and you saw that I
Yeah.
sent
But
Vivicar that
mhm.
information, hoping that's what he was asking for because that's how I read his question. So, um,
Yeah.
and honestly,
Yeah.
I don't think either he or Rajiv have looked at the same documents that Mario sent before we went on vacation last week.
Right.
So I'm like,
Right.
okay, this is exactly what we need, guys. So I'm just hoping that
Yeah.
they start to understand that. But
Yeah.
anyway,
So yeah. And then for the next epic, I thought about. I was like, okay, so those could be like your use case one reports that only display the corporate metrics across all of MCC.
right.
Um, and then that's why I asked Brant that question because my first thought was if we do those, then we would need data from MCC, and so do we have access to that data? And then I was just reviewing his um, email. So he says that the data structure and test data is there now. So my question would be, if that's true, would we be able to do the work for the use case one reports? I'm not sure, so I wanted to ask you what you thought about that.
So want to say yes, but again, so we would need, in order to do that, we would need Rajiv or Vivekar, someone on their team to, or Brant could probably do this too, to be honest. Basically, give us an export of the 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 data structure with like just a few records of examples, so then we can start building our stuff in Salesforce with a little bit better, get less guesstimate work, right? We could definitely, if he can provide that, I'll go to Brant because I'll get crap from Rajiv. But if he can do that and give me just an export of like 3 or 4 sample records, so we can make sure that we do the correct setup in Salesforce, I'll get it ahead of the game for that. Yes, for that use case 1 scenario.
Okay, so what I'll do is I will send an email to Rajiv and Devakar. I'll CC you and Brant and Mario. I feel bad CCing Mario because he's on vacation, but I just want to kind of keep him in the loop.
No, I would do the same thing.
Yeah, and I'll ask him for that. If we could get an export of the data structure that has maybe 3 or 4 sample records so that we can take a look at it and do an estimation.
Yep.
And then we can use that, like you said, for doing like the first one that I laid out and the second one. So use case 2 and 3 for MCC in Mexico. Well, excuse me, use case 2 for MCC, use case 3 for Mexico and Colombia, and then the corporate metrics for all MCC.
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, I'm just making a note here. And let's see what else. So then now, though, here's where it gets tricky. And so to your point, even with these 2 that we just discussed that are kind of the low-hanging fruit, if you will, we still need to do some estimation on how long that would take. No problem.
Right.
But the ones from here on out are the ones that are going to be more complex.
Yes.
Because now we're going to need data from RIW, from corporate metrics, etc. And that's kind of like, and this is kind of the territory that we were talking about yesterday where, hey, we can do a little bit of work up to this point, but until we get that data load or those exports, we can't really do much past X, right? And I think this is that phase where we really need that data, correct, to keep doing the work?
Yes.
Or no? Or am I wrong?
No, so here's the tricky question, because it comes all around the data validation or data testing, making sure that we've mapped everything properly, right? We can't do any of that until we have that data. So we can, like we said yesterday, we can put in mock data, what we think, but until we have data loading into our lower environment, we don't know if that mapping is set up correctly, number 1, or number 2, if the data or if the fields are set up the same way. Like, is this a number field and this is a number field, or this is a date field versus a, or text field. That's the kind of thing that, to me, and Mari would agree that we can't really do all of our work until we have some of that. Again, we'll be guesstimating. We'll do what we think is right, just to keep moving, marching on, and then depending on how right we were in our guesstimate, a little come time when the data team is ready, then okay, we have to go back and circle back. And we do not, from previous history, we always have data problems, data mapping problems. And we can't always just say, hey, that's part of testing. It's not. Because we have to go back and rebuild some things, or someone has to refix the problem. So, you know what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah, I do. And so that data, like you said, until we have the data mapping and going into the lower environment, you can't really do all the work in making guesstimates. That data mapping, et cetera, that you're talking about, that is the outbound data that RIW was referring to yesterday. Is that correct?
Yes. I need.
Perfect.
Yeah. If I have that mapping, like Vivekar was asking about, if I have that, we can have a much better chance of more success down the road.
And because they were talking about, we won't even be able to start, working on the outbound stuff until the 23rd. I wonder if they can at least give us the mapping before then.
And that's my question too. Yep, you're spot on. You're spot on. So I mean,
because it's not like you're doing full exports. You're just showing us what the mapping is so that we can use that to align to Salesforce.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So for our basically our first epic timeframes, honestly, I looked at your first project plan layout. I didn't look at the updated one. Um, I would say we should just let's verify. Let's see our use case twos and threes because those are reports that pretty much are not going to change, right? Because we're not using the corporate metric. We're just keeping it what's in Salesforce. Those are the no change ones, right? So we can just verify that everything is still good there. But we won't be able to validate that until we have that data pool because remember, Rajiv kept saying we're updating the current data set, right? So again, that comes down to testing and whatnot, but there's really not a lot of work for us to do on those use case 2 and 3 reports, to be honest. We'll just have to start guesstimating on the use case ones. And I would focus on the use case ones. So it looks like Brant can give us an export of some sample data for the use case ones.
Yeah. For verifying the use case twos and threes, who needs to verify those? Is that the business making sure that yes, this is how we want it to look, or am I off base with that?
Well, those are the ones that are not going to change visually or data wise.
Oh, okay.
It's basically Marty and I will need to verify that those reports are coming out as we expect them to. And then when we go into like a true UAT where we have data in the system, then we would say, okay, business, I don't care how you're going to validate this. Take your problems up with the data warehouse team. Don't bother me. But now you can validate your reports because supposedly, right, the Cognos reports are going to match up, so they should be a match.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
They say that, but it's I have a little
okay.
reservation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it looks like, so with all this said, okay, so let me dial it back, I guess, a little bit. So what I wanted to try and get today was get these things laid out. And when I say that, I mean, hey, here's kind of the approach we're going to take, so if doing like an epic 1, 2, 3 as I've laid it out, if that makes sense, okay, great. We'll kind of tentatively put it into the build plan. And then the next thing I need is things like, when am I going to start getting the data from who? I need to, chase that down. I have questions, obviously, that I just mentioned for Rajiv and for Brant and things like that. So I'll follow up on that because I want to kind of put pins on those in the timeline. Like, hey, we need to have data by this time, or we need to get loads, during these sprints. And then the other thing I guess we'll need is just kind of an estimate as to, hey, for, this first one, we can get this done in 1 2-week sprint, or we can get this one done in 2 2-week sprints.
Yeah.
Or for the other ones that are more complex, that have more dependencies, we're going to need to try and estimate those, because what I'm trying to figure out is does it look like we can still do all the work as we're laying it out by the end of the year, or based on what we're estimating, just right now, is it going to take us into next year? Kind of thing.
Yep. No, I'm with you.
Yeah, and what I want to do is review that stuff with like Jason and Tom tomorrow, preferably, because Friday, I'm assuming people are going to be taking the day off. They're going to be leaving early.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a lot to do, especially with you being busy today and then me working remote tomorrow. But I'd really like to try and get this stuff together so we can kind of get a skeleton of this built out with these bits of information in there, so that, like I said, I can, talk with Jason and Tom about tomorrow. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. It's a bit of a tall order, but I want to try and get this done so that, again, we're not waiting on everybody else and, wasting time. So.
Alrighty.
Okay. Cool. So next steps, you've got plenty of stuff here that you're doing today. But if any of those things that you mentioned, if you want to reply to any of these things or lay out any questions, let me know.
Okay.
I will reach out to Rajiv, Brant, etc., to ask some of those questions. I'll CC you on those. And then if I'm forgetting anything, or if you're thinking of anything, just pass it on.
Yep. So the only thing I would ask is, based on what I sent Vivicar today, ask the question: When you're going to be able to review the mapping of the Rajiv map or corporate metric document and the Salesforce metric document before the next 2 weeks, right? That's the
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a huge question because
Yeah.
that's what I want to know. I'm like, hey, can we do this now instead of waiting until after the
exactly.
winter?
Yeah.
Because that would be incredibly helpful for us.
Yeah. My guess is they're gonna say no, but can't hurt to ask and have it on record, right? We did ask.
You know what? I know, but you know what? So again, I'm not doing their job. I don't have the detailed knowledge of it, but
Exactly.
they're just if they're just doing the mapping, they're not building out tables or anything like that or doing anything complex. If they could just check that mapping and get the mapping done
Yep.
and get back to us, that would be incredibly helpful so we could kind of get started.
Absolutely.
So I'll put it in that context, and if they just come back with a flat out no, maybe I'll just kind of escalate a little bit to Jason to see if we can push a little harder on him.
Yeah, I got you.
So, okay, cool.
All right.
All right. Anything else?
Nope. I'm looking at your updated plan, and it looks the Epic division. It looks pretty much what we were just talking about. So.
Exact. Right. And I apologize. I was kind of thinking iteratively
No.
this morning.
You're good.
The initial one was like the brain dump, and then it got down to more detailed. So, okay. Okay, cool. Thanks for all the help with this. Like I said, any of that stuff you can get back today, fantastic. I'll send some of those questions out and start working on those. And then hopefully I can get something together that would be presentable for tomorrow.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your help.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.